What's up guys, Lon here from Android Authority, and OnePlus has always managed to deliver a flagship Android experience at a much lower price point than the competition. But how does it compare to one of the best from Samsung and arguably one of the best Android phones available right now? Can it really compete at every step? This is the OnePlus 5 versus the Samsung Galaxy S8. Even though the OnePlus 5 and the Galaxy S8/S8 Plus are separated by a good $100 to $200, these phones are closer than you might think, but that doesn't mean there aren't any compromises with a cheaper price tag of the OnePlus 5. There's quite a few advantages that the S8 has over the OnePlus 5. The S8 has wireless charging, expandable storage, and is water and dust resistant. None of these are really make or break features, with the exception of maybe the S8's protection against water and dust, and with ingress protection being so much more common on smartphones, it's getting to the point where it's becoming a standard feature, and we just sort of expect phones to have it, sort of like we expect phones to have Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. Speaking of Bluetooth, both the OnePlus 5 and S8 come with Bluetooth 5 on board, which puts both of them ahead of other phones in this regard, since there aren't that many phones with Bluetooth 5 at the moment. That's one of the few things that these two phones have in common, but for the most part, they're radically pretty different experiences. One of the biggest and most obvious differences is the way they look and feel. The OnePlus 5 features an all-metal build that does bear some similarities to the iPhone with its reshaped antenna lines and dual camera, but it is a good-looking design and comfortable to hold because of the slightly curved back and rounded corners. With the Galaxy S8, you have a mostly glass design that's held together by a metal frame, which is pretty typical of Samsung. Both the front and rear glass panels are curved for aesthetic reasons and for comfort, but as good as the Galaxy S8 looks, it doesn't stay that way for long once you get your fingerprints all over it. This isn't a big problem on the OnePlus 5, but despite these two phones having some really nice designs, they're both pretty slippery in the hand, so it's sort of a toss-up as to which one you may like better. The main attraction to the Galaxy S8 is hands down the display, and it just blows the OnePlus 5's display out of the water. Don't get me wrong, the 1080p panel on the OnePlus 5 is a very good looking screen in its own right, but when comparing these two side by side, the screen of the S8 is just infinitely better in every way. No pun intended. The screen practically goes edge to edge, and by getting rid of the Samsung logo and physical home button, they were able to shrink down the bezels and stretch the screen vertically to give you more screen in a smaller body. Both the S8 and S8 Plus offer larger screens, and the S8 Plus and OnePlus 5 are very similar in size despite the S8 Plus having a screen that's over half an inch larger. It's just an incredible screen to look at, and nothing on the market right now quite compares to it. The thinner bezels did mean that Samsung had to relocate the fingerprint sensor to the back, which is really the biggest downside to the S8's design. Rear-facing fingerprint sensors are fine if they're properly centered like the G6 or the Pixel, but Samsung chose to put it next to the camera. Eventually you do get used to it, but it's still not the most intuitive of locations, and it's honestly quite slow and inconsistent with unlocking the phone. You do get other unlocking methods like the iris scanner and facial recognition, but even those aren't 100% reliable or completely secure. The OnePlus 5's fingerprint sensor is much more convenient and significantly faster, and is easily one of the fastest fingerprint sensors I've ever used. That speed also translates over to everyday use. The S8 and the OnePlus 5 come with the fastest processor available from Qualcomm right now with the Snapdragon 835, and the S8 comes with 4GB of RAM while the OnePlus 5 comes with either 6 or 8GB of RAM depending on the model. Both of these phones perform very well with your regular everyday tasks like launching apps, playing games, and browsing the web, but the OnePlus 5 just feels much more fluid. Some of this has to do with the software and the faster animations, but the extra RAM definitely feels like it makes a huge difference. The OnePlus 5 can hold a lot of apps in memory, and this phone has been incredibly difficult to slow down, and that's a good thing. The S8 does provide a fluid experience as well, and the animations, while they are longer, do make the experience feel much more refined, but I will admit the S8 does stutter from time to time throughout the day. It's not a deal breaker, but it is something you will notice after having the phone for a while. Samsung software isn't bad by any means, and for the most part, it's really enjoyable. They've made a lot of improvements with it over the last couple of years, and this year it's been tidied up even more with the cleaner icons and a toned down color scheme. Samsung has a bunch of software tricks of their own, like the game launcher for managing all your games in one place, the theme engine that lets you customize virtually every part of the OS, and the super useful always on display that's also highly customizable and can show important information like the time, date, and notifications. The biggest problem with Samsung software till this day is all the extra bloatware and duplicate applications. The addition of Samsung's AI assistant Bixby only further adds to the redundancy, especially when the phone already comes with Google Assistant. Samsung even went as far as adding an additional hardware button to encourage the use of Bixby, but so far I don't think it's really paid off, but maybe that'll change when Bixby Voice gets out of beta and becomes available for everyone. As far as battery life goes, you've got a 3300 mAh battery on the OnePlus 5, 3000 on the S8, and 3500 on the S8 Plus. I haven't used a regular S8, but I've had plenty of experience using the S8 Plus as my daily driver, and the size of the battery doesn't necessarily tell the whole story here. Both are capable of getting me through a full day, but I usually have a lot more left over on the OnePlus 5, and there's been several instances where I've even gotten a day and a half, which has never happened on the S8 Plus. You can definitely tell that having a 1080p screen makes a huge difference to the phone's overall battery life. I also prefer OnePlus's dash charge over Samsung's fast charging method. Dash charging is just insanely quicker, and it's still one of the fastest charging methods available, if not the fastest. The biggest change that OnePlus made this year is to the camera. The OnePlus 5 has dual cameras with a 16 megapixel f1.7 main sensor and a 20 megapixel f2.6 secondary sensor. The second sensor is a telephoto lens that allows for 2x lossless zoom, not optical, and the ability to emulate a blurry background or bokeh effect with its portrait mode. Samsung, on the other hand, stuck with a more traditional camera setup. It's a single 12 megapixel sensor with f1.7 aperture and has optical image stabilization, which isn't available on either sensor of the OnePlus 5s. The lack of optical image stabilization on the OnePlus 5 makes a big difference, especially in low light. In comparison to the S8, the OnePlus's photos are noticeably softer in detail, less sharp, noisier, and tend to have very orangey color tones that don't look very natural. OnePlus is able to close the gap in well-lit conditions and aren't that far off from what the S8 is able to produce, but once you look a lot closer, you can easily spot the differences. The OnePlus 5 tends to ever so slightly overexpose, making the colors, shadows, and blacks look much more washed out, and again, when you zoom in, you can see that the photos are just not quite as sharp or as detailed as the S8's. For a flagship that's being delivered at a lower price point than the S8, the OnePlus 5 can certainly hold its own very well, but you can definitely tell where the compromises are and where it falls short. If you can live with those compromises, then the OnePlus 5 is a solid option. There are things that I think the OnePlus 5 does better than the S8, especially in regards to software and general performance, but for me, the S8 is the more well-rounded package when you take everything into consideration, even if it does come in at a higher price tag. As always, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed this comparison between the OnePlus 5 and the Samsung Galaxy S8. If you did, please give it a thumbs up down below. It's definitely not gonna hurt you. And subscribe to the channel, which is also down below, and hit that notification bell while you're at it so you don't miss out on future videos. And follow us on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, Google+, all that good stuff will be linked down below. And check the website as well, AndroidAuthority.com, your source for all things Android.